This is the magnificent glasshouse at Wisley. It's the Royal Horticultural Society's flagship garden in Surrey. The temperature, the humidity in here is carefully controlled to make all these tropical beauties feel right at home. It's certainly a great place to be on a chilly winter's day. But of course, if any of these plants got just a whiff of frost, like this coffee plant here, they'd very quickly turn up their toes. But out here in the open garden, the plants just have to deal with whatever the elements might throw at them. But you know, we're lucky in the UK, our climate is quite benign, which means we can grow a huge selection of plants from all around the world. But we do like to push the boundaries a bit as gardeners, so there are some plants that need that extra bit of help to get through the coldest of the winter weather. Now, we use the term hardiness to describe how tolerant a plant is of frost. And I'm joined here at Wisley by RHS Chief Horticulturist Guy Barter. And Guy, this is the exotic garden, and definitely some of the plants in here are a little bit iffy in terms of frost resistance, aren't they?
That's right. RHS Wisley, being a experimental garden, we like to push things to the edge here. So we put in plants that are exotic in appearance. Some of them really are exotic, things like bananas that are all wrapped away for the winter now, and other things are like hardy palms that will survive all but the worst frost. And some things are perfectly hardy. We've got a monkey puzzle tree, for example, that looks exotic but is really robust. So all these things are going to be subjected now to the south of England winter, which is not as cold as further north, of course, but we can get some really good freeze-ups. The ground can freeze down to several inches, and it's going to be interesting to see which of these plants survive and which don't. You know, we do cheat a bit. We take some things into the greenhouse, so we'll have something to plant next year, but other things we leave out just to find out. And we've been doing this for many years now. We've built up a really good body of knowledge of what is hardy and what isn't, and that's reflected in a thing called the RHS hardiness scheme, where things are scored 1 to 6 that gives a measure of their hardiness.
Some of the structures around us here are really quite dramatic. What have we got inside this structure? Is that a banana?
Yes. One of the skills that our gardening team have is to make these rather nice structures which are kind of dramatic. You know, they look almost like sort of trolls or something lurking in the garden. Here we've got a banana. Other places we have got lots of palm trees. The palm trees are particularly vulnerable because the growing tip is up among the fronds and can be frozen out. What we're going to do if the palm trees survive to 20 foot, say, I really don't know, but at the moment it's quite easy to wrap them.
They'll have to take their chances then.
Well, I think things become acclimatised as they mature, so if we can get things through the first few years, then we've got a chance that they'll survive unwrapped for many years.
And what you've done here is simply just added insulation to the core of that banana plant. So what have we got inside that wrapping?
Well, we put a wrapping around. We either use hessian, which is a nice recyclable jute fibre, or we use ground cover material. Inside we packed it with ordinary straw, and we bought in some bales of straw. It's all packed in, everything's been trimmed a bit so it all fits, and then we found it's good to keep the rain out, so we put a plastic covering on top. Also, we don't want things tunnelling in there, making nests and such like, so there's a bit of chicken netting over the top as well. And then to kind of camouflage them, finally the fronds that have been cut off have been draped over the top artistically by the garden team.
Well, it looks fantastic, it looks really spectacular. And actually it's surprising how just putting a little cover over something does make quite a big difference. Just something as thin as horticultural fleece, a double layer of that, can add as much as 4 or 5 degrees of frost protection on a really cold night.
It really is remarkable. Around the garden we've got a lot of cannas amongst other things, and we're covering them with mulch, and we'll see if there's enough protection to stop them. I would say caution, however, that RHS Wisley is on a very free draining sand, so this is one of the driest soils you'll find in Britain. On clay soils it might not be so easy to leave things in the ground, but here we've got an excellent chance, all other things being equal.
Also, that free draining soil also increases your risk of frost here, and Wisley is a notoriously cold spot by south of England standards, because what little warmth there is in the ground, if you've got a free draining soil, there's not much moisture to conduct that heat actually through to the surface to just help keep that little bit of frost off.
Yes, it is an extremely frost-prone garden, which is good from our point of view because we're giving things a really good test here. In other places around the garden we've got some cacti and agaves, big succulents, and there's a very borderline hardy, and cacti are virtually not hardy at all. So we're looking at those as well. Some years we lose them, some years we keep them, but it's all part of the experimental nature that RHS Wisley was founded to carry out.
Okay, well let's go and have a look at another way of trying to keep your plants protected from frost over the winter. So Guy, a greenhouse, this is the sort of place that a lot of gardeners will use to get their tender plants through the winter, but it's not a complete protection against frost, is it?
No, this is a standard domestic greenhouse with a single pane of glass. It's excellent for keeping the rain off, and plants are always much harder if their soil is on the dry side. Not bone dry, but pretty dry. You'd expect the temperature to fall below freezing in really cold weather here in the south of England at Wisley during the winter. So only hardy plants are going to survive. Having said that, we've got a lot of canna rootstocks in here that we're overwintering, and we'll keep the frost out by a good layer of straw or fleece or something like that, because it will take the edge off the frost quite nicely. But things won't grow in here over winter, and until the sun comes up next year, around about February and March, you won't be getting the thermal gain that'll actually make plants grow. So an excellent place. Don't waste it for storing your bicycle. It'll keep your tender plants quite well here, but they will need lots of extra protection. And having said that, one of the things that we sometimes do, we haven't done it this year, is we add bubble polythene to the underside of the glass.
Just an extra layer of insulation?
Well, it's actually 3 layers of plastic enclosing some air, so it's an excellent insulator. It does cut out quite a lot of light though, so you have to balance the light with the insulation gain you're getting. And you've got all the chore of taking it down in the spring, but if you've got a lot of tender plants and you don't want to spend much money on heating, then that's another ruse that you can do.
Because of course all we've got between us and the outside world is a very thin pane of glass, so on a calm, clear night, all the heat is going to be escaping out to space just directly through that glass. And the nights are very long in the winter, of course, as well. So even if you do get some sunshine during the day, that will, to some extent, warm up the floor in here. It'll warm up the fixtures, the pots and so on. But that heat will be very quickly lost overnight.
Yes, every greenhouse should have a minimum maximum thermometer. And if you look at that, you'll be amazed at how cold it does fall during the night. Particularly in the corners where it doesn't warm up so much during the day, and also no matter how well you close down the greenhouse, there's quite a lot of air exchange, particularly on a windy night. So the greenhouse is by no means perfect. If you seal the greenhouse, you get a lot of problems with humidity, so it's a balance of keeping warmth in, not having too much humidity, and shedding excess humidity on a warm sunny day. So it does require a bit of input, but they can be very effective even without the expense of heating.
But you can of course go to the expense of heating just to keep the frost off, can't you?
Indeed, and we don't have to heat it to hothouse conditions that would do serious harm to your bank balance. Just having a heater, electric heaters I think are best, although paraffin heaters and gas heaters perhaps are cheaper to run, but they're much harder to control. And if you just take the edge off the frost, so that, looking for a temperature of about 7, it'll fall to 3 in the corners, or 5, but a temperature of about 7 doesn't cost so much to heat and was perfectly adequate for a very wide range of slightly tender plants.
And of course they're thermostatically controlled, aren't they? So
yes.
You can set up your little electric heater, set the thermostat down low, and it'll only just click in whenever it just needs to raise the temperature that little bit.
That's their great advantage over the cheaper paraffin heaters. Also, they don't fill the volume of the greenhouse up with water vapour, and so you get less humidity problems.
So we've got pots, so well down on the floor here we've got eucomis. You're saying actually you'll probably give them an extra layer of protection, just some horticultural fleece or some straw, something like that. So you're getting a double protection then.
Yes, in our experience, we couldn't rely in a cold spell. In 2 weeks of freezing weather, it would be as cold in here as it is outside. So insulating them can make all the difference. And of course, the insulation stays dry. Outside, we put a layer of straw or foliage over a canna. It's rained on, and there's a certain amount of loss of heat by transmission. But with dry fleece and straw over what are quite dry plants, they've got an excellent chance of surviving.
Okay, well not everybody has the space or can afford a greenhouse, but there are other ways of giving some extra protection to plants over winter as well, aren't there? So let's go and have a look at another spot.
Okay.
So we've looked at various ways of helping to protect your plants from frost over the winter, but actually it's really good, isn't it, to have an idea of how the microclimates work in your garden to give that extra bit of protection.
Yeah, it's really crucial. It's surprising what little sheltered nooks and crannies there are in every garden where tender plants can scratch a living over winter and come back into the summer.
And we're in a typical sort of domestic situation here between a house wall, a garden wall here, and within this space you're going to get a little bit of heat just radiating from these walls throughout the course of the winter, just enough to give that extra bit of protection.
That's right, a sunny day will warm up the bricks and give a good bit of heat. Another thing is it keeps the wind off, so things aren't rocked by the wind. There's also a bit of a rain shadow from walls that kind of keeps things dryish as well. Not bone dry, but dry enough to make a difference. So if you have tender plants in pots, for example, you can stack them up against the wall, perhaps raise them off the ground a bit so they don't lie in water, and the coldest air will be beneath them, and they'll survive very nicely over winter without the expense and effort of a greenhouse. So it's a lot of plants you can save this way.
And even better if there's a little bit of an overhang, say overhanging roof or some tree branches, because that's all stopping that heat going out to space and just helps to keep the temperature that little bit higher.
And indeed keeps a little bit of the rain off, so that there's less chance of them rotting out over winter.
Actually, I think, you know, most people don't realise that it's the ground cooling down that is the real driver for frost on a calm, clear night. So in the winter, the ground is losing all that heat directly out to space, cools much more rapidly than the air round about, and it's actually that cold ground that cools the air above it. That's why you can get what we call a ground frost.
Yes, indeed, the cold air pools at low levels, and one manifestation of that, which you can often see in the winter, is the cold air flows downhill. And if it flows downhill and meets a hedge or a fence, it can accumulate, and there can be quite a deep depth of cold air. So that's another aspect of microclimate one needs to be wary of. And
maybe wary in an area like this where it is quite enclosed. Just make sure that the cold air can actually drain away somewhere.
Yes, it's surprising how very sheltered these courtyards are, but one does have to look out for wind tunnels and also pooling of cold air.
And it's amazing what a big temperature gradient you can get, actually, and it's worth bearing in mind in the spring when you've got things like tender bedding plants, you start running out of space to put them. The lowest temperature is actually on the ground, and where do we put our plants? We put them on the ground. Just as simple a thing as raising them up onto, say, a bit of staging, a bench or a table or something, can actually give you 4 or 5 degrees of frost protection.
Yes, even if you cover things with fleece, they're still going to be sitting in a pool of cold air, and the fleece's protection might well be insufficient.
Well, Guy, thanks ever so much for showing us around Wisley and giving us some really good tips on frost protection, and hopefully that'll help you get your plants through the winter.